Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open an incredibly fascinating piece of research called the children's verbal line. And look, this isn't just some dry linguistic study. It actually reads like a captivating detective story into the human brain. We're going to look at the exact moments a human being first learns to express action, movement, and intent. We'll be digging into a unique, naturalistic dataset that traces exactly how a child moves from making simple sounds to building complex thoughts. I know, it sounds like a dense academic topic, but we're going to decode it together, right here, right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our roadmap for today covers the first verbal steps, tracking 21 months, decoding baby talk, the architecture of sentences, and finally, a conversational habitat. This is going to act as our guide to unpack the amazing journey of a Brazilian child, identified simply as G, and see exactly how he learned to communicate with the world.
Part 1. The first verbal steps. It is an absolute mystery how children acquire verbs, but that's exactly the dense academic topic we're going to decode today.
Think about it for a second. How do we actually know what a baby means when they speak their very first words? Verbs are the engines of language, right? They're way harder to grasp than simple nouns because they represent actions, states of being, relationships. Well, to figure this out, researchers in a city in northeastern Minas Gerais, Brazil, took a totally brilliant approach. They didn't put a child in some sterile lab. Instead, they observed a monolingual Brazilian child, our protagonist Gui, in his own home, naturally interacting with his mom and his grandmother. They literally just let the everyday magic of family life unfold without interfering at all.
And that natural observation lasted for a whopping 21 months. That's 21 months of continuous, spontaneous audio recording compiled by the Longitudinal Child Corpus, or CIL, research team. Just imagine the sheer dedication required to capture everyday family interactions for almost 2 years. The mother, who actually doubled as the researcher, patiently recorded and annotated these dialogues to capture the raw, unfiltered reality of a child's linguistic development.
Over that incredible 21-month period, the researchers identified exactly 131 distinct verbs used by little G. Now, this isn't just a handful of words. It's a massive, incredibly valuable naturalistic dataset for linguistic analysis. By isolating these 131 verbs across hundreds of everyday conversations, the team created an unprecedented timeline of verbal expression. We get to see not just that a child learns verbs, but precisely how and when they deploy them in real life.
Section 2. Tracking 21 months. To truly understand this data, we have to look at the chronological journey of our protagonist, G.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because appreciating the scale of this project is absolutely crucial. The whole thing kicked off in May 2015, when G was just 5 months old. Over the next couple of years, the team recorded 47 separate sessions, each averaging about 30 minutes. Then, a massive milestone hits in March 2016, right at the 15-month mark. That's when the researchers confidently recognized G's very first verb. The dataset we're looking at today meticulously tracks his progress from that exact moment all the way to December 2017, when he was 36 months old. It's literally a map of a mind expanding.
Section 3. Decoding baby talk. Now we shift from the when to the how by categorizing the specific sounds the child made. So, we know when the learning happened, but how on earth did researchers categorize all those adorable, often confusing sounds Gibba was actually making? Well, the study established 5 distinct phonetic categories to classify everything. They tracked formas, ressonantes, where the child essentially echoes the adult, redução, which is reducing or dropping syllables, substituição, substituting sounds, forma criativa, with totally creative new forms, and finally uso convencional, which is conventional adult-like use. This framework was a real game-changer, allowing researchers to logically sort everything from a simple echoed sound to a perfectly pronounced sentence.
Now, what's really interesting here is seeing how these categories play out in actual practice with real examples from the recordings. When the mother says achou, meaning found it, G responds with chou. He just drops the first syllable entirely. That's redução. And when he tries to say celular, cell phone, he says celular, swapping out sounds. That's substituição. Obviously, it's incredibly adorable, but scientifically speaking, it shows a brain actively experimenting with the physical mechanics of speech.
But honestly, perhaps the most fascinating category is the forma criativa. This is where G invents completely original words that you won't find in any Portuguese dictionary. For example, he uses the sound cacuca to mean machuca, which translates to hurts. Cacuca isn't a real word. Yet, because he uses it consistently in dialogue with his mother and grandmother, it gains real, functional meaning within their household. He is literally inventing his own temporary language on the fly. How cool is that?
Section 4. The architecture of sentences. Here's where we realize researchers didn't just look at sounds, they mapped these verbs onto an unpublished taxonomic framework by Mario Perini to really understand the grammar.
To map out this grammar, the researchers took those 131 verbs and specifically looked at a structure called verbal diathesis type C1. Now, I know that sounds complicated, but let's break it down into steps. A standard sentence needs an agent, the subject doing the action, the verb itself, and a patient, which is the object receiving the action. But remember our example where G just says cho for found it? He's only giving us step 2. Yet the researchers classified this as a full C1 structure. Why? Because in the child's mind, the invisible agent, himself, and the invisible patient, the toy, are absolutely present.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that context is everything. The researchers call this naked verbal use, or uso verbal nu, and it works perfectly because G and his mom share the immediate physical context of the room. They were playing a game, actively looking for a tampinha, a little bottle cap. So when he says show, he doesn't need to say, I found the bottle cap, because they are both staring right at the exact same thing. The grammar is already built into the shared physical reality of the room long before it's ever built into a spoken sentence.
Section 5. A conversational habitat. Let's focus on what this vast collection of data ultimately tells us about the environment required to learn language.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer volume of trial, error, and repetition in baby talk. Out of the 623 total verbal uses recorded by the child, the researchers fully described 39% of them in their study. But check out that remaining 61%. That massive chunk of data was actually excluded because it was redundant or heavily repeated. And listen, this isn't a flaw in the data, it's actually the whole point. Learning a language requires a staggering volume of hesitation and repetition. It is messy, repetitive work.
The study arrives at this beautiful, really heartfelt conclusion, summarizing that language emerges from a conceptual interactionist scenario, a family communicative habitat. Think about that. Language is not something a child learns in a vacuum by just passively listening. It is a deeply social, highly responsive collaboration built day by day, error by error, right inside the safe, loving habitat of a family's dialogue.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to ponder. If learning to speak relies so heavily on this shared communicative habitat, how deeply does our earliest family environment shape the very structure of our lifelong thoughts? It's pretty amazing to think that the way your family responded to your very first babbles might still be echoing in how you construct your sentences today. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. I really hope you found this deep dive into the true social power of our first words as fascinating as I did.